The day my brother signed the papers on his restaurant, my mother cried. Not the quiet kind of crying she does at funerals or sad movies, the full kind, hands over her mouth, shoulders shaking, the kind that makes everyone in the room stop breathing. My father had his arm around her and he was grinning so wide it looked like it hurt his face. My brother stood there holding a pen and a folder, and he looked like a man who had just been handed the world. I stood by the kitchen doorway and nobody looked at me once. I had driven 4 hours to be there. I had asked my manager for the day off 2 weeks in advance. I brought a card. It had a little illustrated restaurant on the front, and inside I wrote something I actually meant, something about how I was proud of him even when it was hard to say. I never gave it to him. I left it in my car and drove home that night with it still sitting on the passenger seat. That was 3 years before any of this happened. But I think about that afternoon a lot. I think about standing in that doorway and feeling like a guest at someone else's party, in my own family's kitchen, holding a card I couldn't bring myself to hand over. My brother's name is the first word my mother says when anyone asks how her children are doing. Always has been. I figured that out young. He is 2 years older than me, and from the time we were kids, he had a specific gravity that I didn't. Teachers remembered him. Neighbors asked about him. My parents' friends would see me somewhere and say, "How's your brother?" before they said anything else. I used to think it was just charisma. I spent a long time thinking it was just charisma and that I was being sensitive about it. I am 31 now, and I know it was not just charisma. My parents gave my brother $80,000 to open his restaurant. They didn't tell me until after the paperwork was done, until after the money had already moved, until it was a fact and not a conversation. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening and said, "We wanted to let you know we helped your brother get started," like it was a small thing. Like helping someone get started meant $80,000. Like I was being informed and not specifically excluded. I remember sitting on my bathroom floor after that call. Not because I was dramatic about it. I was doing laundry and I sat down on the tile to fold something and then I just stayed there. The washing machine was running. The sound of it was very ordinary. I kept thinking about a conversation I had with my father 2 years before that, when I asked if they could help me with the deposit on a small workspace I wanted to rent. I had been doing freelance graphic design for 4 years by then, had real clients, real contracts. I wanted a dedicated space to work, something small, nothing extravagant. The deposit was $3,000. My father said they didn't have it right now. $3,000. They didn't have it. And I believed him. I adjusted. I kept working from my apartment, kept stacking books under my monitor so my neck wouldn't ache, kept taking calls in my bathroom when my roommate was loud. I figured it out. That is what I always did. I figured it out. $80,000. I did not call my mother back that night. I did not call her the next day either. I told myself I needed time to process it before I said something I couldn't unsay, and that was partially true. But the deeper truth was that I didn't know what I would say at all. There's a specific silence that comes when you realize something that was always vaguely true has now been confirmed in a way you can no longer explain away. I had explained it away for a long time. The better birthday presents, the college fund that ran out before it got to me. The way my father talked about my brother's potential at the dinner table like potential was a fixed resource, and my brother had used the most of it. I had explained all of it away, and then $80,000. I still had the freelance work. I still had the clients and the contracts and the apartment. I had, in the previous year, started working with a small branding agency on a consulting basis, and that relationship had grown into something close to a real job with real structure, even if I was still technically independent. I was not struggling the way I had been at 24, 25. But I had never stopped carrying the memory of those years. The years when I was scrambling, when $1,000 would have changed the shape of a month for me, when I asked my father for $3,000 and he said they didn't have it. I want to be fair. My parents were not cruel people. They took care of us when we were children. They showed up to things. My mother made dinner most nights, and my father coached my brother's little league for 3 seasons, and they were, by most measures, decent parents. I do not think they sat down and decided to love my brother more. I think it was quieter and more ordinary than that. I think he just fit what they imagined, and I didn't, and nobody ever examined that closely enough to catch it before it became the shape of everything. But fair doesn't mean unbothered. I could be both. The workspace I had wanted back then, I ended up not renting it. But around the time of that phone call about the $80,000, I had been quietly doing something else. For about 18 months, I had been setting aside a portion of every payment I received. Not aggressively, not on a spreadsheet with projections, just a habit, a small one, something my grandmother had told me once when I was 19. You put a little somewhere, it's not easy to touch, and you do it every time, and one day you look and it surprises you. She was right. It surprised me. I had enough when I looked to do something I had thought about for 2 years, but never said out loud to anyone. There was a small commercial unit, 2 towns over, in a neighborhood that had been quietly changing for 3 years. Not flashy about it, but changing. Ground floor, big windows, reasonable lease. The landlord was looking for a long-term tenant and was willing to work on the deposit structure with someone who could demonstrate stable income. I could demonstrate stable income. I signed the lease on a Wednesday morning and did not tell my family. I want to explain why, because it wasn't purely strategic. Part of it was self-protection, the way you cup your hands around a small flame in the wind, not because the flame is weak, but because the wind is real. Part of it was that I had watched my brother's announcement become this enormous communal event, this collective investment of emotion and money and attention, and I didn't want that for my thing. I wanted it to be mine first, fully mine, before anyone else's feelings got onto it. So I said nothing. I told my closest friend, who had known me since college and who had watched all of it from the outside. I told her over the phone and she was quiet for a second, and then she said, "I knew you would do something like this eventually." That was enough. That was all I needed. The first 4 months were the hardest. I was still doing client work full-time while also building out the space, which I was using to launch a small independent design studio, more intentional than the freelance had been, with a clearer identity and a few anchor clients I had cultivated carefully. I repainted the walls myself over 2 weekends. I learned more about commercial electrical than I ever wanted to know. My friend helped me install shelving for 2 full days and we ate takeout on the floor, and she told me terrible jokes and I was, in a way I hadn't felt in years, very happy. I did not tell my parents. Months passed, I did not tell them. I had a website, I had business cards. I had clients coming to the studio for meetings. My work was going somewhere I could finally see clearly. I was not thinking about my family much. I was thinking about the next project, the next client, the next thing. The silence in my chest where the old ache used to be had been replaced by something that felt, if not like peace exactly, like motion, like progress that belonged entirely to me. My mother called in October. She called to tell me my brother's restaurant was struggling. Not failing, she said carefully. Not failing, just going through a hard stretch. She asked if I had any thoughts on branding, on social media, on what she called the presentation side of things. She framed it as asking for general advice, but what she was actually asking was clear. I said I was pretty busy with my own work right now. She asked what work, and something in me just decided. I told her about the studio. I told her plainly, not dramatically, not with the weight of everything I had been carrying. I said I had opened a small design studio about 7 months ago, that it was going well, that I had a good client base. I said it the way I would tell a colleague, matter of fact, no performance. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I didn't know how to explain it in a way that would land, so I just said, "I wanted to build it first." She told my father. My father called me 2 days later. He said he was proud of me, which was something he said rarely enough that I noticed it, and then he said he would love to come see the space sometime, and then he said, and this is the part I had been waiting for without knowing I was waiting for it, he said, "You know, your brother could really use some support right now, and family helps family." I let that sit in the air for a second. Then I said, "Dad, when I asked you for $3,000 for a workspace deposit, you said you didn't have it. You had $80,000 for his restaurant 3 years later. I'm not interested in relitigating that, but I want you to understand why I'm not in a position to blur those lines right now." He didn't respond the way I expected. He didn't get angry. He got very quiet. And then he said, "That's fair," in a voice that sounded smaller than his usual voice, and I didn't know what to do with that, so I just said, I'll think about what support might look like, but I can't promise anything right now. I have thought about it since. I have thought about it a lot. My brother called me himself about 2 weeks after that. It was unexpected. He and I had never been the kind of siblings who called each other just to talk. Our relationship had always been mediated by our parents, always slightly formal in a way that neither of us had ever addressed directly. He called and he didn't open with the restaurant. He asked how I was. He asked about the studio. He seemed genuinely curious and not performing it, which caught me off guard enough that I answered more honestly than I might have otherwise. We talked for almost an hour. He said something near the end that I have turned over many times since. He said, "I always thought you were fine. I thought you had it handled. Mom and Dad always said you were independent and you didn't need things the way I did. I believed them. I didn't say what I wanted to say, which was, I was 23 and eating ramen 4 times a week, and I needed things the same way every person needs things. I didn't say that. I said, I think they believed it too, and I think that's worth all of us looking at honestly." He agreed. Or he said he agreed. I don't know yet which one it is. What I know is this: I am not angry the way I was in that bathroom 2 years ago. The anger has changed shape. It's become something more like clarity, which is less comfortable in some ways because clarity requires you to keep making choices instead of just feeling things. I chose not to discount my services for my brother's restaurant. I told him I would be willing to work with him at a reduced rate given the circumstances, but that I couldn't offer it for free because my studio is a business and not a family favor, and conflating those two things had caused enough damage already. He understood. He said he would think about it. I don't know what he decided. I chose to meet my parents for dinner in November. My mother hugged me when I arrived, and she held on a little longer than usual, and I let her. My father asked real questions about the studio, about how I had chosen the location, about the clients. He listened. I don't know if that changes anything structurally, but it was a different dinner than most of the dinners I can remember. I chose to go back to that space on a Tuesday evening in December after a client meeting ran long and I was tired and a little worn. I sat in one of the chairs I had picked out myself, and I looked at the windows and the light coming through them and the shelves my friend and I had built over those 2 days. My name is on the door in a font I designed. The plants in the corner are plants I chose. Every object in that room arrived there because of a decision I made. Nobody handed me this. Nobody invested in this. Nobody cried happy tears over a folder I held. And I looked at all of it, and I felt something I don't fully have a word for. Not triumph. Quieter than triumph. Something closer to the feeling of being in a place that was made for you, except you were the one who made it. I walked home that night in the cold. The street was mostly empty. I thought about my grandmother and her advice about putting a little somewhere. It's not easy to touch. I thought about all the months that advice had been running quietly in the background, doing its work without asking for attention. I thought about the card I left in my car 3 years ago, the one with the little restaurant on the front. I think I understand now why I couldn't give it to him. Not because I didn't mean it, but because there is something exhausting about performing happiness for people who have never had to perform it for you. And I was so tired that day. I was so tired of being the person in the doorway. I am not in doorways anymore. I have my own door. I put my name on it myself. And that, I have decided, is enough. Not as a consolation. Not as a second prize. As the actual thing. As the thing I chose and built and kept, even when nobody was watching. Especially because nobody was watching. I have thought a lot about cause and effect, not in a mystical way. I don't believe the universe is keeping score or that suffering earns you something eventually. I believe in something more ordinary and more demanding than that. I believe that what you do consistently, quietly, without an audience, becomes the structure of your life. And what you avoid doing, the hard conversation, the honest accounting, the willingness to look at what you've actually been choosing, that also becomes the structure of your life. It just looks different. My parents made choices. They made them over years, in small moments that probably didn't feel like choices at the time. The way they talked about my brother at dinner, the way they answered when I asked for help, the way they framed his needs as urgent and mine as optional, none of that was a single decision. It was 100 small ones, compounding quietly the way all important things compound, And I made choices too. I chose to believe my father when he said they didn't have it. I chose to keep explaining away the pattern instead of naming it. I chose for a long time to perform okayness for people who hadn't earned my honesty. Those choices cost me something. Not everything. I want to be fair to myself, but something real. Years of asking less than I needed. Years of making myself smaller so the contrast wouldn't be so visible. What changed wasn't a single moment. It was closer to a slow accumulation of clarity. I started putting money aside, not because I had a plan, but because my grandmother told me to, and I trusted her more than I trusted her stances bought. I signed the lease not because I was fearless, but because I was finally more tired of waiting than I was afraid of the risk. I built something in a room that nobody handed me, on a street I chose, with a name on the door that I designed myself. And in doing all of that, I stopped waiting for permission that was never coming. That's the thing about self-reliance, that nobody tells you when you're young. It doesn't feel heroic. It feels like paperwork. It feels like 2 weekends of repainting walls and learning more about electrical wiring than you wanted to know. It feels like eating takeout on the floor with your best friend and laughing at bad jokes while your back hurts. Resilience isn't a feeling. It's a practice. You do the next thing, then the next one, and the integrity part. That was harder than the work. When my father called and said family helps family, there was a version of me that wanted to collapse back into the old shape, to agree, to smooth it over, to be the bigger person in the way that actually means the smaller person. I didn't do that. I told him the truth, plainly, without cruelty. I said what had happened and what it had cost, and what I was and wasn't willing to do. That was harder than signing the lease. That was harder than the electrical. I don't know what my family becomes from here. I genuinely don't. My brother and I talked for an hour, and something shifted between us that I'm still figuring out. My parents came to dinner, and my father asked real questions, and my mother held on a little longer when she hugged me. I don't know if that's the beginning of something or just a good night. I'm trying to leave room for both possibilities without needing to decide yet. What I know is that I am not waiting anymore. Not for validation, not for the investment that didn't come, not for the acknowledgement that my choices were worth something. I have the studio. I have the windows and the plants and the shelves and my name on the door in a font I made. I built it the way my grandmother taught me, a little at a time, somewhere it wasn't easy to touch, and one day I looked, and it surprised me. That's enough, not as a consolation, as the actual thing.